We don't budget, but we track our expenses. We spend somewhere between, $80,000 and $85,000 a year right now, including our mortgage. We don't budget just because we don't have to at this point, and we're still saving a lot of money, maxing out all our tax advantaged accounts and, saving above that as well. So what we do is we just track it, and we just discuss what we spend. And then if, things are getting a little kind of out of whack, we'll talk about that together. Do we want to bring that down? Is it bringing us joy and value? And if so, we'll keep spending on it. But we're at the point right now where just in our normal kind of course of living, we don't really need to watch our spending too much at this point.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Okay, welcome back. Another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is 199. Jace, what's going on? We're here actually together in person this week. What's going on?
Super excited. We're in person again. We're going to be doing a few things with the podcast this week in person. You're going to have some bonus content for all y'all out there in the near future. So super excited about that. And we've got a lot of things obviously in the pipeline here coming up. But yeah, man, summer's winding down. Kids are going back to school, and we're taking part of that as well. Our kids are going to a different school than they were in the past, and I've got another baby coming here pretty soon. So that's what's going on, man. What about you?
Awesome. Well, I can't say my kids are changing schools yet because I don't have any, but so we just interviewed actually today as we speak Morgan Housel, who wrote The Psychology of Money. You've read that book, right? I have not yet, but I think you have.
Yes, that's correct.
And what'd you think?
Yeah, it's a great book. It's definitely a very well-known personal finance book, very different from a lot of other books, as he takes a lot of these stories and relates them to, personal finance and topics and stuff that, I think typically in a lot of personal finance books, we get into some of the details, spreadsheet, how to invest, this, that, and the other thing. And he really takes a different approach with it as it relates to psychology and why we do the things that we do. So it's a great book for sure.
Yeah, so when we were interviewing him, we talked about compounding, and I think we asked, okay, what's the difference, or what do people think about money? What makes some people win with money, some people don't, et cetera, et cetera. And he talked about compounding and how time can be your friend. And so I just thought of this quote. We'll launch his episode the next month or something here, but I thought this quote that he had on compounding was pretty good. He said, if something compounds, if a little growth serves as the fuel for future growth, a small starting base can lead to results so extraordinary they seem to defy logic. It can be so logic-defying that you underestimate what's possible, where growth comes from, and what it can lead to. And then in the book, he goes down and talks about $81 billion of Warren Buffett's $84 billion came after his 65th birthday, and how somebody said about him, his skill is investing, but his secret is time. If you want to do better as an investor, the single most powerful thing you can do is to increase your time horizon. I don't know how we always do that besides starting early. But he talks about hitting base hits, getting good returns. It's about earning pretty good returns that you can stick with and which can be repeated for the longest period of time. That's when compounding runs wild. So I just thought that was an interesting quote, interesting kind of take on him as we have an interview coming up with him soon.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we discuss compounding. And, we've got the famous quote that, from Albert Einstein, that compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. And it's interesting as we were talking to Morgan and just, discussing compounding interest and, that time horizon. Obviously, we just, you mentioned the Warren Buffett earned, majority of his wealth, in the last 20 or 30 years. But it's, after he was investing for 40 years or whatever it was, 40, 45 years. And it really does start to take shape. And I think especially for this generation, the baby boomer generation, who's kind of moving out of the workforce here over the next several years, they have definitely been able to probably really see a lot of those fruits. And it's why I think you see a lot of these articles that, we're looking at the staring in the mirror of, what's going to be potentially the largest wealth transfer in history, because a lot of these people, they've lived longer lives. In a lot of cases, they were more willing to take these investments whether it be in the market or real estate or whatever, and they've been able to compound their money, and it's grown to significant heights.
Right. So pretty amazing even when you plug in your numbers, right? If you have a certain amount of retirement funds and you plug in 6, 7, 8, 10, 12%, whatever you think your return's going to be, and put in a certain amount of years. If you get started early enough, pretty soon you can just let it sit and let it ride for 20, 30 years if you're in your late 20s or 30s, and you get a pretty good sizable chunk in your retirement accounts. So anyway, just thought that was interesting because we have that interview with Morgan Housel coming up. Just a quick recap of last week's episode. We had John, net worth of 4.2. Great interview with him. We're thankful to him for coming on, sharing his time. He's 55, married with adult children now. So we talk about that dynamic, who pays for what when they do a family vacation. Just some interesting stuff that we haven't necessarily talked about in the past. He has a paid for house worth over $1 million, a rental worth about the same or a couple $100,000 less, and then a couple million in the stock market. So fun interview with John. This week we have Kevin. He's a 32-year-old CPA. Net worth is just over $1 million. We take a deep dive into his asset allocation just like we do on every interview, talk about his career trajectory, his savings rate, investment strategies. Obviously, he's a young millionaire at the age of 32, so fun interview with him. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And without any further delay, let's get right into this interview with Kevin.
Kevin, do you want to just give us a little about your background and what you're up to now?
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm 32 years old. I'm a CPA located in the Midwest. I've done accounting for my whole career, graduated from college back in 2009, which was kind of a tough time to graduate, but I was an accounting major, and luckily myself and most of my friends in the accounting program had jobs when we graduated, and I stayed in that field ever since. Jumped around a few employers during that time, and I'm still in the field now, working remotely from the Midwest.
Awesome. And what's your net worth today?
We just crossed 1 million.
Awesome. Newly minted millionaire. I love it. And how is the million broken up?
Sure. So we keep it pretty simple. So we like to keep about a year's of expenses in cash. So we have about 80 grand in a high yield savings account and some short term debt instruments, 415,000 in our 401ks, which we just keep in the cheapest S&P 500 funds in our 401ks. Have about 300 grand in after tax brokerage accounts, which have mostly developed international index funds in there because we like to get the tax credit for our income taxes. Roth IRAs are about 115, which is a split between some small cap value and some emerging markets. HSA, 30 grand. We just started with some private company investments, 20 grand, and then home equity of about 80 grand.
Wow, so you got a pretty diversified portfolio going there. Let's jump into some of the details in this and maybe give our listeners, because you're such a young millionaire, did this look like this in terms of the breakout 5 years ago or even 7 or 10 years ago when you first got started?
No. So, I've always been pretty decent with money. I always made sure that I had an emergency fund, and that kind of goes back to as a kid. I just remember growing up there, there was a couple times, and I don't want to exaggerate or anything. There was only like 1 or 2 times growing up where money was a little tight. And I just always remembered that I want to have something squirreled away just in case. So ever since I got my first W-2 job when I was 15 years old, I just always made sure I had at least, $1,000 in a savings account just in case something happened. So I was always decent with saving, but nothing crazy. So when I graduated, I contributed probably, 5 to 10% in my 401k while trying to pay off some student loans. I had about 30 grand in student loans after undergrad, and then I tacked on another 10 grand shortly thereafter for a master's. So I hated having that kind of hanging over my shoulder. So I basically was just saving a little bit into my 401k and then using the rest of my money to pay off the student loans. So my assets at that time, weren't very substantial. It was just probably in a target date fund in my 401k for the most part and some cash just for an emergency fund.
Okay. So did you start investing though, right when you got your first job, even though you had some of the student debt?
Yeah, I made sure. I think it was, some coworkers, and I kind of knew about 401ks just from being an accounting major, taking I was new to contribute to your 401k and at least get that match. And I think I was doing probably right off the bat, I was probably doing 5% and getting like a 3% match or something like that. And then I actually bought a car when I was 21. I graduated when I was 21, and I bought a car that was about $20,000. And I took out a note for that. So I had that and my student loans. So I wasn't saving too much besides paying those two things off.
Wow. Okay. So started, were you maxing it out at the time, or at what point did you start maybe maxing things out?
So where my situation really changed was I took a new job, which had me move to a bigger city. And so my income, I think I got like a 10% raise from probably 70,000. And I was about 26 years old. So I got a raise from probably 70,000 to close to 80,000 to move to the big city. And that alone didn't really get me going. But shortly thereafter, I was able to, I was in a new city. So I was working pretty hard in the new role. I was pretty excited about it. So pretty quickly within the next year or two, I was able to cross the $100,000 per year for my income. And that's when I started to save. At that point, I paid off my student loans, or at least got them really low to where they were maybe $5,000 at a 3% rate, where I started paying probably the minimum on that, if I remember correctly. And then that's at that time when I moved that I kind of discovered FIRE. So financial independence, retire early. I discovered that right around the time when I moved to the big city, because I had the student loans, I had the car, and some people were telling me, oh, you're moving to the big city. It's expensive. You got to be careful, rack up credit card debt, go broke. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm getting a raise to move to the city. I'm going to sell my car. I'm going to live with roommates. So I said, I want to make the best of this situation. My income was increasing. I got rid of my car note. So I did a lot of research just to kind of understand what I could do at that time to really take advantage of this new job and new income, while at the same time, I was starting to get rid of my debt.
That's pretty remarkable. So you have this debt, you start out in a normal entry-level job in accounting, take a better job, if you want to call it that, got a little bit of a raise, still had the student debt, and you had car loan as well at the time, or did you pay for that in cash?
No, that car at the time, I had a note on it, and I sold it when I moved to that big city because I didn't really need the car anymore. So I got rid of it at that time, but I still had student loans. They were lower at that point. And then I made large payments on the higher interest ones. And I think within a year or two of moving to that bigger city, I had them down to probably $10,000 or less of just, 2 or 3% loans. And at that time I was doing research, and they were saying, oh, you should, contribute to retirement and save and invest rather than pay off those loans. So I let those, the smaller loans, the lower interest, kind of hang out there for a little bit.
That was kind of be my next question. So you mentioned they were saying, who's they, and why did you decide personally to make that decision to invest instead of maybe, attack those student loans?
Yeah. So, and it kind of was weird how it all happened at the same time. So I moved there, I settled in, and I just started doing research. And I don't remember exactly what I typed into the Google search bar, but I came across some of the personal finance blogs, and I stumbled upon folks like Mr. Money Mustache, Living a Fi, Mad Fientist, Jim Collins, among others. And from their blog posts, they had kind of talked about some of the other kind of, I guess, more professionals within investing and personal finance, like Rick Ferry and Bill Bernstein and Larry Swedroe. And from the blogs, I kind of moved to the white papers and the books on asset allocation and investing. So I kind of found my spot with the kind of the Boglehead type, control what you can, keep your costs low, your taxes low, monitor your expense ratios on your investments, and just try to track the indexes, because over the long term, you're just not going to be able to beat the market. And I had actually opened up a brokerage account in college and my roommate did it at the same time. So we kind of looked at it as like fantasy sports kind of. We both were trading in our dorm room with the $2,000 or $3,000 that we had saved from summer jobs. And we just never did really well. Every once in a while you would pick a stock that would do well, but I just knew personally that I wasn't very good at picking stocks. So this kind of, all the data and the research on just keeping your expenses low, picking an index and sticking with it, that really made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, good for you. First of all, congrats on your success, especially at such a young age. Let me just keep going here with what Jace was asking. So you pay off this debt, or let me back up though. What was and we usually talk about this at the end, but what was your salary coming out of school? How much did you make at your first job?
Yeah, my first job was $50,000 a year in accounting.
Okay, 50,000. And you graduated when you were how old?
21 in 2009.
21. And then you became millionaire at what age?
32.
Okay, so and so maybe your net worth, how long did you say it took you to pay off all the loans?
Probably by the time I was 27 or 28, but it was just because I had left some linger out there for a little while.
So you did this, and your wife, right? I think it's important to note that she works outside the home as well. So you're dual income here, right? You guys did this in 10 years, right? You became millionaires.
Yep. And I think a lot of it has happened in the past 3 or 4 years. I've really increased my income in the past 3 or 4 years from what it was. And my wife started her career a little later. So, she's still coming into her salary now. So it's kind of been, I think a lot of the growth has happened in the last probably three years, most likely.
Wow. Good for you. So how does somebody who's coming out of school, right, at the age of 21, how in the world do they know what to do? How did you know to do all this? Did your parents teach you this? You talked about boggleheads and starting to read and Mr. Money Mustache and all that, but is there a specific moment or conversation or something that kicked it off, or was this always the plan?
So I don't want to paint the picture that I was, doing anything special when I had first graduated college. Like I guess I knew that student loans were bad. And I think I learned that just in school, being in an accounting and finance program. We covered investments and things like that. And, debt at a high interest rate is bad and things like that I learned in school. And I do remember though, my parents teach me, like when I was 18, I wanted to get a credit card, and my mom told me that you never want to, carry a balance because the interest rate is just ridiculous, and you're going to pay so much in interest more than you're going to pay for whatever item you got. But besides that, I don't know. I just was always interested in money. Saving, like I had, mentioned before, was important to me just from those, couple of times where I saw that my family would have done a little better if they had, put a little more money into a rainy day fund. So that I'm sure that stuck with me to always have a little bit on the side. But the kind of the debt aversion or just wanting to pay off the student loans, that probably just came from college and my accounting and finance program.
Yeah. And how long have you been married?
We got married back in 2018, so 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fairly new, right? Congrats.
Yep. Thanks.
And when you got married, did your wife have student loans or anything you had to pay off or a nice chunk of savings?
No, my wife didn't have any student loans. Thankfully, that was covered, through scholarships, and her parents were able to chip in as well. She was kind of, only a couple years into her career, so she brought over a little bit of assets into the picture. And I think when we got married in 2018, we're probably combined total net worth was probably like $550, $600 about 2 years ago. But over the past 2 years, we've been able to sock away, a decent amount just through increases in our income.
Yeah, good for you. So let's talk about jumping around on the jobs, right? I think you've jumped around or moved around cities and roles. How has that played a role in increasing the net worth? I mean, obviously in the last 2 years, it's been monumental, right? 500 grand-ish, you just said. Was that the biggest driver, was moving from job to job?
Yeah, for sure. I would think that's played the biggest role. So just kind of going back to my first job out of college, I was making about 50 grand a year, and it was, 2009. So 2010 rolls around, and, we have our annual reviews and we get our raises, and I got really great reviews for my first year there, and I was super excited. And go to sit down, and they were saying, okay, here's your 3% raise. We're still kind of in a recession, and here's your puny, like, I don't even know what it was, $1,000 bonus. And I said, huh, like, I busted my tail, and it's in accounting, as you guys know. I was working, a lot of hours, and I said, well, I got, these great reviews, what were other people's bonuses? And they're like, oh, well, you were $500 more than the average of bonus. I'm like, well, I busted my for, $500. Right. And so pretty quickly, I was like, well, this place isn't going to work out for me. If you're not rewarding the folks that are working more, or, kind of in a more of a meritocratic enterprise, I wanted to go find that. So I started talking to friends, and one of my buddies was like, "Oh, I'm working at this firm, and they seem to pay a little bit better, and if you work hard, you can kind of move up and you'll get paid more. And if you want to, move to another city, you can do that too." So I went over there and I worked there, and I felt that my value was being recognized a little more. And after 2 years doing that, I got the opportunity to move to another city to do a different job. And that's once I moved into that role, is kind of when the income started taking off, because it was in a niche field. And that's where I felt like my value was really seen. And then as long as you're, kind of putting in the time and contributing to the team and, basically earning money for the firm, they actually rewarded you a lot better than what I was getting prior to that. And then since then, I moved on twice for different roles and to increase my income and move into a different role that suited my lifestyle a little better.
So had the jobs always come with the new jobs, or the jobs that you pivot to? Had they always come with a salary increase, or were some of them lateral moves to get different experience?
So position-wise, some of them were lateral, but for the most part, I'd always make sure that my income was increasing. So, the past two moves that I've done in terms of roles were probably, lateral moves, but I was able to articulate my value in those moves better each time. So I was able to increase my income. And I think it also, obviously, we're in a bull market here, which has an effect on my job, because our client work goes up when liquidity is in the market and firms are able to grow, and so it gives us more work, which kind of has been a tailwind for my career, which I've definitely realized as well, as the tailwind in the markets has helped my career as well.
Kevin, let me ask: is there anything you would have done differently as you've navigated your career up to this point?
Hindsight's 2020, so I don't know if there's anything particularly specific that I would have done differently. Maybe I would have left a role a little earlier, because I think when you start, if you're in a job and you're kind of getting that feeling where I think the grass is going to be greener, but then you start talking to people and you're like, oh, maybe it's not greener. Well, sometimes it is. So I think sometimes you just got to make the move, make the jump. It's scary, especially in your mid 20s to late 20s. You have maybe 5 to 6 years under your belt. You're still maybe a little bit of that imposter syndrome still. So, but I think maybe I would have made a couple of the jumps a little bit earlier, but I've never been passionate about something else to the effect where I wanted to change my career or anything like that. So I've kind of stuck with the accounting because I've been good at it. And, every year it's paid me more than the prior year. So it's just worked for me. And then I've been also been able to transition into roles that suit my lifestyle more, less hours, no weekend work, things like that. So I've used my kind of financial position to be able to negotiate in these new roles to not have to work crazy hours or do extensive travel and things like that.
Yeah, totally. So let me ask, Kevin, as you navigated this career path and received the raises and provided more value to the firms and the companies that you've worked for, has your lifestyle changed at all? And if so, by how much on a year-over-year basis?
Yeah, I mean, once I discovered FIRE and I was living in that big city, I was pretty frugal at that time, but I was also making a lot less money. My wife and I actually purchased a house last year, and while the price of it was well below 2 times our gross income, because we live in the Midwest now, so the cost of living is lower, but I've been able to keep my income from those cities with a higher cost of living. So we were able to buy a home that compared to our income wasn't a lot of money, but because we're in the Midwest, it's actually fairly nice, which was nice to do because talking to friends that are in the Northeast or on the West Coast, how much they've spent on their houses and how old they are. It's crazy. And it's, just tough to do unless you're in a kind of a law firm role or an investment banking or, a higher paying role to be able to buy a house that you really are happy to own. I'd be lying if I said we haven't increased, our lifestyle in the past couple of years with our income. We don't budget, but we track our expenses. We spend somewhere between, $80,000 and $85,000 a year right now, including our mortgage. We don't budget just because we don't have to at this point, and we're still saving a lot of money, maxing out all our tax advantaged accounts and, saving above that as well. So what we do is we just track it, and we just discuss what we spend. And then if, things are getting a little kind of out of whack, we'll talk about that together. Do we want to bring that down? Is it bringing us joy and value? And if so, we'll keep spending on it. But we're at the point right now where just in our normal kind of course of living, we don't really need to watch our spending too much at this point.
So I want to ask, since you've married recently and you were pretty well on your journey, did you mention to your now wife what your net worth was about when you got married? And if you did, about what time did you kind of do that in your journey?
So I had discovered kind of financial independence right around the same time that I met my wife. And so right away we were kind of talking about it. I was like, hey, kind of figured out this thing. It sounds, like something I want to work towards. And so I kind of wanted to know about her situation as well, because if I was going to go down this path and we had just met, kind of wanted to make sure that our ideas were aligned with regard to money. Because if I found out that, this was not something that she could ever see herself doing, was, saving to try to reach financial independence, then, I wanted to know that right away, just because I was, as soon as I learned about it, I was fairly passionate about it as well. So no, from basically day one, we were both very open with each other's finances, and we've continued to do that to this day. And well, now we have combined finances, but, we're still very open about spending. We'll talk if we want to make a big purchase, we talk through that together. And so just try to be on the same page with that.
What was her reaction when you first brought that up?
It's a while, 6 years ago now. I think when you're just starting to date someone, you're kind of in that, phase where, whatever they say sounds good, right? If you're really into each other. So, I'm sure she just was nodding her head and saying, hey, that sounds like a good idea. And actually she, as well hasn't been a big spender. So this kind of gave her kind of a reason to save rather than just kind of being frugal to be frugal. So I think it kind of gave her a reason because, she's seen as well, when you have, friends and family members who can fall on hard times, lose a job, things like that. I think it's pretty easy to see the value in having a nest egg put to the side so that you just don't really have to worry about those situations.
Totally. So, Kevin, where do you go from here? Are you trying to reach a certain net worth or passive income goal or retire early? What does the journey look like? You're 32 now. You got a long road ahead of you. What does it look like?
That's a good question. It's something that I'm really thinking about now. Financial independence is the goal. The retire early part, we'll see when that time arises. But what I am going to try and do is take a sabbatical next year in 2021. I'm going to try to, depending on how this pandemic is kind of looking at that time, I don't want to take a bunch of time off and just sit at home. So we'll see how that's shaping up, but, want to try to take off 3 months and just see how I like it. Am I going crazy? Do I find a hobby that I'm really passionate about? Do I just spend more time with my hobbies? It'll give me a good chance to travel as well if we can do that at that time, and just see how I feel about it. I've been working straight through since I graduated college, with, vacations here and there, but I haven't taken off any extended period of time. And some other folks in my company have taken some sabbaticals. So I'm pretty sure that, my work will be accepting of that. And I'll, hopefully get a little travel in, see some family and just kind of see how it feels to kind of take the foot off the gas for a little bit.
How long are you thinking about doing the sabbatical for?
I'm thinking 3 months in 2021. I think that's just in terms of sabbaticals from what I read, that's pretty typical, and I think it's a good good spot where, you're not getting too far removed from work. And at the same time, that work will be agreeable to leaving work for that period of time. And then also it's just going to be kind of based on, because we do like to travel. So if international travel hasn't really opened up at that point, maybe it gets delayed to 2022 or something like that. But, I'm hopeful that maybe in the second half of 2021, it's something I can do. And my wife has the ability to work remotely as well. So we'll see, how she plans to kind of handle that if we decide to do some traveling and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is if she's doing one as well, so you can time it and do stuff together. So
yeah,
it seems like you're working on it.
Yeah, I don't think she'll do the full 3 months, but maybe she'll take, a little extended time to do a nice trip or something like that.
Yeah. So to Jace's point, how do you go about figuring out what you're going to do and what the goal is? I mean, he mentioned, right, you're 32, you got your whole life ahead of you here. You're a millionaire. You could technically retire now, right, and live off the 4% withdrawal rule if you wanted to keep a lower cost of living, right? 40 grand-ish. I mean, how do you even start? How do you know what you're going to do? How do you go about, what's your thinking behind that?
Yeah, I think, and that's a very good question. I don't have like this burning passion to go do something else. I'm kind of envious of folks who are like, oh, I want to be a park ranger. So they leave their law firm and go be a park ranger and they're as happy as they can be. But, I just don't have that right now. So, I have my hobbies. I like riding my bike, working out, traveling, things like that. But it's not something that I can see myself doing, 24/7 for the rest of my life. Right. So, my career is very intellectually stimulating. It can be a pain at times. I get a little burnt out doing it at times. And I think that's one of the main reasons I want to try the sabbatical, is just kind of take the foot off the gas for a little bit and just, kind of think about what I want next. Because you're right, we're in coast FI territory. We don't really need to save any more money for traditional retirement, but that just opens up some doors to do some interesting things, whether I want to try something a little more entrepreneurial, where I want to take off some time to, go travel. But for the foreseeable future, I'm going to keep my job and just kind of try to figure it out as I go. Because, I don't want to just kind of be, rudderless trying to figure it out. But I do want to get into some other hobbies that will take up some more time, like woodworking and carpentry and things like that. But I've started doing those on the side, but it might be nice to just spend a little more time learning about those, maybe taking some classes, things like that.
Yeah. So just jumping back here to your allocation, you have about 830 or so of your million, or just over $1 million in the market. How come nothing in real estate?
So I have a lot of friends and acquaintances that have residential real estate. And it's just not my cup of tea, I've learned. All the horror stories that I've heard just is not something I want to deal with. I like that when I get paid, I log on to Vanguard, I deposit some extra money, and I don't even have to think about it. With regard to the residential real estate, like I get it. You're using leverage with an asset that gives you a decent amount of yield, mostly through the leverage. You can hire out the management of it, but then your yields are going to start coming down a little bit. It works well for a lot of people, but then I've also, talked to a lot of people who have bought, 2 or 3 or 4 duplexes, single family homes. And then it's just become such a headache that they end up selling them all and then just end up putting the money back into the market. Now I understand for some folks, it works great and they find a great location, or they live in an area where the yields are really good and they can kind of keep an eye on it. But I've done a ton of research on it, and I just know myself too well to know that it would just drive me nuts. So yeah, I'm just more comfortable in the set it and forget it. And the equities, mostly, I'm basically 100% equities with the exception of our, pretty decent emergency fund. I don't know if it's just my temperament or, being in the accounting and finance field from, through college and my whole career, but the volatility of it just doesn't really bother me. We had the big kind of drawdown in the spring of this year. And I mean, I was more kind of just worried about people's employment and my employment rather than kind of how my, equities were performing. We have the cash on the side, so I wasn't too concerned about like my job or anything like that. But, the equities just, they don't bother me or keep me up at night.
So let's jump. Yeah, good answer. Let's jump to your private investments. You said you have, 20 grand investments in private companies?
Yeah, so just started that this year. It's probably, being bored at home, because of, COVID, but I opened an AngelList account and have been investing through AngelList in some syndicates starting this year. It's, I'm going to keep it probably less than 3% of our investable assets. So we're at like 2% right now, but it's just something fun to do. I come from, like I said, accounting and finance background. So I enjoy reading the investment memos and watching the founder pitches and things like that. And it's just an interesting thing to do that it's probably not going to have any significant impact on my net worth.
You never know,
at the same time, yeah, exactly. But at the same time, it's a fun little hobby.
So how many different, it's on AngelList, you said, right? How many different companies have you invested in?
I'm only doing like 1,000 to 2,000 each. So it's probably like 15 at this point.
So what's the total raise? I'm not too familiar with it. If you're investing 1,000, is there a minimum? And then what's the total raise a company looks for?
Yeah, so AngelList does anyone from kind of pre-seed who's raising at a $4 million valuation. They're raising, $500,000 at a $4 million valuation, all the way up to C rounds where the company's raising 40 million at a 300 million valuation and things like that. I try to stick to the pre-seed seed rounds very early. So most of the time, these companies are going to go belly up, but at the same time, the one or two that potentially will see returns will hopefully go up, enough to offset the losses of the other 99% that kind of failed.
Yeah, right. So when you invest, so like on your last one, if you invest just a couple $1,000, what do they give? They give you some certain percentage of equity?
Yeah, so it's a syndicate. There's a individual or investment firm that goes and sources the deal, and they get an allocation to the raise. So say a company's raising $1 million, the syndicate might get an allocation of 250 of that million. So they go to their syndicate members and raise the 250, and they get a 20% carry for doing that. So after the investment, IPOs or gets sold. Well, this is in a success scenario. If they, get acquired or have an IPO, all the LPs, the limited partners who invest in the syndicate, get their capital back. The syndicate lead gets their 20% carry off the top, and then the rest gets distributed to the LPs as their return. So the syndicate leads can, get their 20% carry for kind of doing the legwork, writing up the investment memo, interviewing the founders, and they put together a nice little kind of deck to kind of explain the company. And so that they get compensated that way. And then the lazy people like me who just get to kind of cut a check or, a transfer and get a piece of the round.
Yeah. And then how did they do taxes at the end of the year? You get a K-1 or something?
Yeah, so that's kind of like AngelList's sell to these syndicate leads as they do all the back end. So at the end of the year, they just give you a consolidated K1.
Consolidated for all of your investments?
I believe so. This is my first year, but I did look it up at the beginning, and I believe it's a 1K1 for the. I don't know how they do it, but I think that's how it works. Yeah.
And for somebody who's listening that's interested in, how's your experience been with AngelList? Pretty good?
Yeah, the platform is awesome. It's super intuitive. It's very easy. You have to answer a few questions at the beginning when you apply and they want to make sure you're an accredited investor. I forget what, an act was just passed in the past couple of years, which has kind of opened up the accredited investor definition. So I think more people can start investing in private investments like this, where before you had to have, a net worth over $1 million or income over 300,000. I think now if you have, and I'm going to be butchering this, but if you have your CPA or a Series 7 or things like that, you can start investing in these private investments as well. And I think AngelList has kind of done a lot of that lobbying because they want to kind of democratize private investments is kind of their spiel.
Gotcha. So along this whole financial journey, Kevin, did you worry about money at all? Or did this all happen so fast for you and you could see the light that it wasn't much of a concern?
I think I got a little too focused on it probably in my mid-20s when I first kind of discovered this financial independence thing. I was working long hours, stressed out, and you're in your mid-20s, stressed out, you're making good money, but you're like, what's the end? What's the end goal, right? Am I just going to work myself to death until I'm 60? And I knew I wanted to kind of eventually get out of it. So I figured as long as I had some cash on the side, I wouldn't have to pick my next job based on salary alone. I could base it off what I was doing, location, location, who I'm going to be working with, whether it was a remote role, would I have to commute to an office, would I have to travel, things like that. And I would have more say in the next thing that I was going to do. And that was what drove me the most to kind of get this nest egg rolling. And then, once it started rolling, I think I thought about it less because it was just set on autopilot. And like we discussed, my investments are pretty vanilla. It's pretty simple to take care of, set your 401k, max out your backdoor Roth IRAs, contribute to your HSA, and you don't really have to do too much besides rebalance every year if you want to. So I've been able to kind of transition away from spending so much time with it. I had to do a lot of research and reading in the front end. And that was my hobby at the time for probably 2-3 years, where I was just reading and reading and reading as much as I could about it because it interested me so much. And it just got me to a place where I felt comfortable taking my kind of foot off the gas, I would guess you would say, and just setting everything kind of on autopilot so that I didn't have to worry about it too much.
Kevin, when you took your foot off the gas, did you stop investing as much or maxing things out, or?
So when I say take my foot off the gas, I guess I mean I didn't, I'm not tracking my expenses as much and kind of beating myself up for spending more than I did last year. I still every month am going on and saying, how much excess cash I have and investing it and making sure I'm investing it. But, we built up a pretty nice emergency fund, so I don't like saving too much cash just because yields are so low right now. So I do like to get my money into the market as fast as I can. But I'm reading different books besides Rick Ferry's Asset Allocation and Bill Bernstein books. It's not my full hobby anymore. I still enjoy reading articles on personal finance and safe withdrawal rates and things like that. But I just don't devote as much time to it anymore, and I'm able to concentrate on other hobbies and interests that I have.
Is there a point where you think you will take the foot off the gas maybe and not invest quite as much into retirement accounts?
I mean, I think as long as, I get a tax advantage from contributing to retirement accounts, I'm going to keep doing that. Now, there could be a situation in the future where I don't want to, continue on with my career and I want to do something else and it just doesn't earn as much. So we'll, use whatever funds that I'm earning at that time to kind of support our living. And I think I'd be comfortable with that just because we've kind of set up our retirement now that I know when I'm 60, I don't need to save any more from now until I'm 60 just to have a traditional retirement. So that takes a little bit of the stress away from the earning side of the equation, where I can now kind of more concentrate on the lifestyle side.
Do you regret maybe working as much as you did in your 20s?
No, I don't, because at the time I didn't really have, anything else that was, how do I want to say, like constructive, right? My hobbies now are more working out, going for bike rides, traveling, things like that. But at the time, I probably would have just been doing stupid stuff with my friends. So I don't look back at it and say I should have probably worked less in my 20s. I was in a big city. I was single for a portion of that time. So it's just, I enjoyed getting the experience, networking in my field, getting better because I would see the kind of the fruits of that effort, when I was able to, get a raise or promotion or change jobs, and I would be able to show value in that respect and kind of get into a new role that I was more excited about.
Interesting. So, Kevin, we've touched on this a little bit before, but I kind of want to press just for somebody who's so young. You've done this so quickly. How do you start evaluating financial opportunities? And, you mentioned that you started investing in these in Angel List. Do I keep investing in the traditional? I know you talked about the tax advantages, or go to a Roth. How do you start evaluating all these financial opportunities now that you've got to the point where you're a millionaire?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the most part, I know myself enough where I want to keep 90+% of our assets tracking index funds, a diversified. We're 60-40 US international. So I'm comfortable with that allocation. Maybe down the road, and it also depends on yields and kind of what we're doing. But when, when you're earning enough and your savings rate is high, you're able to be a little more aggressive with the asset allocation, or at least we're able to do that. So, going forward, I think I'll still allocate 90+% of whatever we save to that asset allocation, just because I know that that's what we're most comfortable with. Now, maybe we'll up that, 2% of kind of more risky allocation. Maybe that'll get upped as the net worth grows to 3% to 5% to 7%, just because as the net worth grows, the impact of those investments won't have as much of an impact on our lifestyle in the future, or when we, do decide to retire, just because, I think we'll definitely be well ahead of the curve then. And I hope to have the problem of, saving too much and rather than saving not enough. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. What do you think your return will be for the market investments going forward?
So whenever I kind of project out our net worth in the future, I'm pretty conservative. I'm using about a 6% nominal return for our portfolio, so probably 4% real. I'm hoping that that's too conservative. I know a lot of folks use a lot higher return, but I always, I like to sandbag kind of a little bit with our goals, just because I'd rather be pleasantly surprised than kind of beating myself up because it didn't work out the way that it could have worked out.
Sure. So let me just wrap up here, Kevin, with a couple rapid fire questions, and then we'll finish it up here. So you became a millionaire at age 32, right? You said?
Yep.
And household annual spending about 80,000, I believe?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be like 80, 85. Yep.
Okay. And then what's been your range of annual household income through your working life, as much as you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. I think when I met my wife, it was probably combined around 90. And then now it's just over 300, depending on the year.
Wow. Good for you guys. Any books or products, websites, anything you recommend? I know you hit on a couple of these earlier, but anything specific?
Yeah, I used to be really big into the financial independence blogs like Mr. Money Mustache, Living a Fi, Mad Fientist, Jim Collins. I don't, those guys aren't as active as they once were. And it's, I've kind of read everything I need to read on the subject. So for someone starting out though, I think those are great places to start. Book wise, I just read Morgan Housel's new book, Psychology of Money, which I thought was great. And if I could go back and give that book to my 21-year-old self, I'd do it in a heartbeat, because it just kind of really distills down kind of the mixture of the psychology of money with the numbers and how people think about it. And, not getting caught up in kind of trying to keep up with, your coworkers and your friends and things like that, and just doing the things that you want to do because you want to do them, and not getting too bogged down in other things. So that's kind of where I would start if I was getting on this path.
Awesome. So just wrapping up here, final question. If somebody wants to be you, right? I mean, young 30s, millionaire, now has the flexibility to take a sabbatical, to take some time off, to figure out what you want. You've obviously saved a ton. You've done extremely well. If they're coming out at 22, 23, what would you tell them as advice, or what do you wish you would have done differently? Yeah,
I think accounting was, is a good career. I was a little nervous going into accounting that, I'd kind of get bored. I'd get in a role that I wasn't really excited about. But if you get your CPA, and that was the first thing I, made it a goal of mine when I graduated, when you get your CPA, you're going to really be, hard pressed to, not be able to find work someday as long as you have your CPA. Now, it might not be in the best role, but you're going to have a lot of opportunities. And to change roles and get into a finance role or get into a corp dev role, it's just going to open up a lot of paths. So if someone's thinking about accounting, I think it's a great career to get started. And then you're going to also understand business, so that if you do want to go start your own business, you're not going to be starting from square one. You're going to understand from the financial side what needs to go into that. Because if you are a person kind of, unlike me, and you have like that passion that you want to go do it, I think accounting is a great place to start, because not only do a lot of the jobs have a pretty decent income coming out of school, where you'll be able to save some money, but it'll also give you kind of that backbone to go try other careers or start your own business and kind of go that route.
Awesome. And just in closing, I'm just curious, because you're so young, do your friends and family or those you associate with know you're a millionaire, know of your wealth?
I've told a few friends who are in similar situations that I just know make, similar incomes and who have kind of progressed pretty quickly in their, engineering or finance careers. So we have kind of opened up those lines of communication where we bounce things off each other, kind of discuss, savings vehicles, how much we're saving, things like that. Because a lot of this is just, I think we've had a amazing tailwind. If you graduated in 2009 or 2010 and you were able to get into your, chosen career outside of school, there has been a pretty big tailwind. And as long as you've found yourself in those positions to kind of excel and bounce around and do those things, there's a decent amount of folks who are millennials in their early 30s who are making a very good living. And I know that's not kind of what is portrayed in the media. And I know it's most likely a small percentage of folks, but I think it is important if you are on that path to kind of find those other people, because it's not typical to, try to save a ton of money, or pretty early on. So I think it's great to have, friends and people you can talk to about this stuff and kind of bounce ideas off of, because, reading about it all the time will only get you so far. I think, real life application and talking about it with other folks, it will really get you over that hump and really understanding the path you want to go on.
Yeah. Great advice. And thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story. Again, everybody, that's Kevin, 32-year-old CPA, net worth of $1 million, did it in about 10 years. Really, really amazing. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing, Kevin. Really
Thanks a lot,
it.
guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.